Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of High Value Publishing. My name is Eric Schoenfeld. I am the founding partner for Nearview Media, and we consult with all different kinds of media companies on their digital strategy, revenue, audience, and technology. Before we get started, hey, go out to my website, nearviewmedia.com, sign up for my weekly newsletter to get notified of these sessions every time they come out. We try to do at least one a week throughout the year. I'm going to talk about programmatic advertising for owned and operated media today. Programmatic advertising is something that I think is still a bit of a mystery, even for publishers who are actively using it or selling it. So this will be a two-part session going through programmatic advertising, but today we're going to talk about owned and operated. So here's the world of programmatic advertising from a media company perspective. Now, I'm specifically coming at it from the perspective of a publisher or a media company, not from any other kind of company. I break this into two different buckets. One is programmatic advertising that is for your owned media. This is where you place programmatic advertising on your own website or within your own email newsletter with the goal of generating additional revenue beyond anything that you directly sell yourself. There's some issues with this kind of programmatic advertising. One, it typically does not work well for B2B media companies. Two, you typically need 1 million page views or more to make it worthwhile from a monetary perspective. Otherwise, the numbers are just too small, and some programmatic vendors won't even work with you. And number three, the ad quality and user experience can sometimes be problematic. You have to be very, very careful. Sometimes you can't even overcome those ad quality and experience problems, but we'll talk about that more during today's session. The next session that we'll do on this is where we'll cover non-owned media. This is where publishers place advertisements on other platforms, social media, websites, video, whatever, on behalf of your advertisers. These are not your own properties. The goal is to generate additional revenue opportunities and, in some cases, just become a one-stop shop for advertisers. There's some issues here, though. First of all, there's some better options for B2B media companies here in the non-owned media space, and we'll cover that in the next session. But there are way too many options. If you've ever worked with a programmatic partner, you will know they have this giant Chinese menu of 18,000 different things that you could potentially sell. It's way too complicated. And the number one thing to making this successful is we have to simplify it. We have to simplify the offerings for our team and for our advertisers, and that's something we'll talk about in the next session. The other big challenge that we have with selling programmatic advertising on non-owned media is, what's our unique selling proposition? Why does the advertiser need us? What can we do that other agencies and advertisers themselves can't do on their own? Why use us? We're definitely going to talk about that in the next session, and you'll see these little areas in the green. This is where I believe that we as media companies do have a unique selling proposition, and so I'll highlight those in the next session. But in the meantime, we're going to start with owned media, and we're going to start with what I call programmatic backfill. We're going to start with programmatic backfill on your website. This is usually done in your run-of-site inventory. And it's basically saying that, hey, if you don't use up all your inventory with your own direct sold campaigns, let's backfill some of that inventory with programmatic advertising that comes in and gets some extra revenue off of it. It's a good solution. It works for a lot of media companies. It typically works much better for consumer than B2B because the advertising typically will not hit the B2B niche or even B2B at all. It's typically more consumer-oriented advertising. Google AdSense is perhaps the most popular and well-known option here. It's also one of the simplest to implement. But you're going to see RPM's revenue per 1,000 page views in the $1 to $3 range. So, in other words, if you've got 100,000 page views of unsold inventory, you could expect to get anywhere from $100 to $300 for that inventory. Most publishers don't have enough inventory to really make this worthwhile. There are other methods, though, to do programmatic backfill, some more sophisticated methods. There's what are called managed publisher ad networks. These are things like Raptive, Medicine, et cetera, things like that. These can typically generate better RPMs, $8 to $25 RPMs I've seen in some situations. Again, you need to have a decent amount of inventory to make this work, but we can actually get some better numbers when we start getting into some of these more sophisticated publisher ad networks. We're not going to have time in this session to talk about how to do that, but I just want to make this is just getting you aware of all of the options that are out there and what you might want to look at. And then we get into what's called header bidding. Header bidding is where there's an auction of multiple ad networks for your inventory, and that can boost the CPMs up a little bit more, the RPMs, sorry, up a little bit more, maybe a couple of dollars more above a managed publisher ad network. So the takeaway from this, if you're a consumer publication and you have a pretty strong traffic, I would say 1 million page views a month, maybe down to 500,000. That's pushing it, but 500,000 to at least 1 million page views a month and a decent amount of unsold inventory that you're not directly selling yourself. I would consider looking at programmatic backfill, but I would look at managed publisher ad networks before I would look at using Google AdSense. Google AdSense is kind of the bottom of the barrel in the programmatic backfill market. So there's the programmatic backfill for your websites. This is an example. If you look at Boston Magazine, you'll notice that little 3 dots and the little icon there. That's a clear indicator that this is actually programmatic backfill from Google AdSense or the Google Ad Network. So Boston Magazine, good on you. You're finding a way to monetize your your non-sold direct inventory. I still am a firm believer that the number one solution is to focus on better selling your direct inventory yourself. But if you've got the inventory, if you have some open opportunities, it can add a nice little revenue stream to your operation. We'll move on to email newsletter programmatic backfill. Yeah, believe it or not, there actually is such a thing where you can do advertising in your email newsletters through a third party. Some of the bigger companies out there, Live Intent is probably the biggest one out there. There's some other ones, Jing, Pasendo, some others out there. Typically what you do is you define kind of these ad positions in the newsletter. You'll set them up in these networks. You can still do direct sold campaigns. Again, this is not if you're doing sponsorship of newsletters, forget about it. This is if we're kind of selling CPM or inventory based newsletters. And again, consumer is going to be much better on this than B2B. If you're in B2B, I probably wouldn't even consider this. But direct sold gets first priority in your newsletters. Unsold inventory then gets backfilled through the programmatic networks of Live Intent or Pasendo. And then if there's no backfill, we can default to house ads on that. Again, these are typically low CPMs. You're going to expect a $2 to $4-ish CPM on what they call rendered impressions. So rendered impressions are opened emails that actually show and complete the display of images. So you got to take that into account. It's not just how many emails you send out. It's how many emails you send out times how many are opened, how many ad positions, and how many of those ad positions actually render as images. If that doesn't happen, you're not going to get any revenue, obviously, because the ad's never seen. But again, you can expect around a $2 to $4 CPM on any of those impressions that actually wind up getting rendered. So let's move on to content and native. I call it kind of content widgets. These are things you can embed on your own website natively within the page itself that deliver extra revenue. Some of the big ones you'll notice are Taboola, Outbrain. If you've ever used the Discuss commenting platform, they embed advertisements in there. They're all very low RPMs, typically around $1 to $2 per 1,000 page views on your site. You've seen things like over here, this is Taboola. This is off of a website. So you've seen all these kind of extra links at the bottom. The right, this is from Discuss. This is the commenting tool that is embedded in a lot of websites, and you can see that they embed ads in Discuss like that. I've also seen this done with a company called Direct, where they have AI generated search results. Typically, there's some challenges here with these. They typically the links I've seen are pretty low quality, pretty spammy. It also interferes with the recirculation of your site, the ability for you to generate more page views, and even some of your audience development, right? If I'm going to the bottom of an article, and do I click on one? Do I look at these, or do I go and look at more pages on your site? So you have to weigh all of these. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of things like Taboola and Outbrain, but I do know media companies that make some decent money off of those. So if kind of recirculation, generating more page views per visit is not a big issue for you, and you have tons of page views, Taboola and Outbrain can bring some decent revenue to your site, some incremental revenue to your ad sales efforts. Just keep in mind that it's going to be pretty much consumer only, not B2B. And does it represent what your brand wants to represent? Some people don't care. Some people care a little bit more. I've never been a big fan of, now new sleeping pill better than Ambien and no prescription. Yeah. But sometimes use revenue is revenue. So just play with that. Be aware of that. So let's move on then to, this is kind of content native. Maybe I'll rename this as embedded widgets. Then I'll call this overlay. So the overlay are things that are outside of kind of the website itself. They're like video overlays, adhesions, or what I call sticky ads, interstitials between page views, things like that, right? Things that are outside of the normal page layout. Here's a great example from Greeley Tribune here in Northern Colorado, where they have a video ad overlay over here. They have another ad overlay down here, right? These can work and they can do a good job. Again, consumer, not B2B. You've got to be careful about the overcrowding of the ads. I've been to some sites, and especially on mobile. Again, if you're a consumer, most of these are going to be mobile. But if you're looking at mobile, there's so much stuff on the site and different ads popping up all the time. The user experience just sucks. And you have to close things, and they make the close button the tiniest thing ever, and you can't use your finger to close it. It's just a bad user experience often. That being said, if you manage it properly, if you don't overcrowd and get too greedy with it and destroy the user experience, it can be effective. But you've also got to remember, it's not just the ads, programmatic ads that may show up here. It's your own overlays that could pop up here as well, right? Your email sign up, maybe a web app notification like you see with OneSignal sometimes, maybe your own direct sold overlays, anything, all those little things that pop up all the time as the user's just trying to read a freaking article can get very annoying. So I typically stay away from these kinds of overlays. If you do it the right way, then you can make it work. You can make it work, but you've got to be very cautious with that. And then finally, in our owned media, programmatic advertising, we're going to talk about affiliate links that are here. So there's different kinds of affiliate links that you will oftentimes see on publisher websites. There's automated link solutions, things like skim links, sovereign, button. That's code you put on your website. It automatically scans the content on the fly for any potential affiliate links it can do there. And then it places those links in your content with some usually a special kind of look. And then when you click it, it goes out to an affiliate to an e-commerce vendor. And if someone purchases that product, you get a share of the revenue. That's how it works. There's also manual affiliates. Things like, Amazon is typically the most common. I'm not going to talk too much about those because that's not necessarily so much in the programmatic, but it's more the automated link solutions, skim links, sovereign, those kind of things I'm talking about. So here's an example from BuzzFeed. Good example. And I pulled up BuzzFeed's website on mobile over here, and I did a look behind the scenes at the code because there's a couple things I want to show you. So you can see this is, I just think you should know about these 42 cheaper versions of brand name products before you splurge. This was the article. And then right here, all of these, the e.l.f. Glow Reviver Slipstick, the Clinique's Black Honey, the Mauve Mentality, these are all automated affiliate links that come up. And you click them, you go out to an e-commerce site, you purchase it, they'll share the revenue with you, the publisher. These are very, very common in larger consumer websites. You've got to be very, very careful with these, though, if you're going to use it. So number one, there's usually not a ton of revenue for most publishers unless you're pretty sizable. Again, we're talking 1 million page views or more per month. But there are a couple of risks. One, there's FTC compliance, Federal Trade Commission, if you're here in the United States. FTC requires disclosure between the publisher and the merchant. So you'll see this notification up here. It says, we hope you love our recommendations. It's independently chosen by editors, but we may collect a share of the sales or other compensation from the links on these page. Here's our guidelines on how our affiliate partnerships work. Right? This is a clear disclosure. Again, fine print, but a clear disclosure that there's affiliate links on this page. Okay, you must do that right there. It can't just be in your terms. It's got to be right there on the page where the links appear for it to count. There's several cases I worked with media companies last year that got hammered. Google did a major update for spam policies, and they looked at these kinds of affiliate programs and hammered them. So there's a couple things you've got to do to make sure that you don't get Google penalties. And by the way, it wasn't just the page, the entire site took a nosedive in traffic for several media companies that I wound up working with. What we wound up doing was we made sure we had clear FTC compliance. And then number two, if you'll notice, I looked at this particular link. If you look very carefully right here where this yellow arrow is pointing, you'll see rel equals sponsored. This link is indicated that it is a sponsored link. That tells Google's search engine and any other search engine, this link to e.l.f. Glow Reviver Slipstick is not an editorial link. This is a link that has clearly been paid for or has some sort of monetary compensation tied to it. So then Google can appropriately classify it. If you follow these rules, typically you can avoid Google manual penalties affecting your site. Honestly, a couple companies I worked with, they just removed these because they weren't making much revenue anyway. So they just removed these altogether, and we saw their Google rankings go back up. So just be very, very careful about utilizing automated affiliate programs like you see here, or any affiliate program. By the way, I will also tell you, if you do sponsored content on your site, here's a bonus tip. Sponsored content on your site, you need to tag it as rel equals sponsored if you're linking from that article back to the company who purchased the sponsored content. Same reason, that is a paid for piece of content and the link is paid for. You must indicate that by using the rel equals sponsored attribute on that link. Okay, so that was our programmatic advertising for owned and operated media. We're going to do our next session will be programmatic advertising for non-owned media, where you can sell campaigns for your advertisers on other websites, other social media properties, and other audio video outlets. So that'll be the next time. But in the meantime, I hope you found this helpful, and we'll catch you next time.